My name is Paige Holloway. I am 34. And when my husband said, "From now on, my money is mine," something in me went still. I did not argue or blink across that dinner table, because after 6 years of marriage, I knew exactly who had been carrying our life. I am a senior clinical data systems analyst in Chicago, and the condo around us was mine before the wedding, which made his fairness smaller. That night, I opened my laptop, pulled 6 years of statements into one file, and built a spreadsheet that stripped every excuse off our bills. Mortgage, assessments, insurance, utilities, groceries, repairs, dinners, weekends. Every line landed under my name, and by midnight, his half had become a real number. It was more than he could carry without losing comfort, and that was the first honest thing our marriage had produced in years. I printed the page before sunrise and left it beside his coffee, where the steam moved over the total like a final answer there. Owen read it in silence, then gave me a stunned, "Quiet. I can't afford that." And the sentence stayed hanging between us for long. I looked at the paper, looked at him, and left the arithmetic untouched, because I had been carrying the whole structure for years by myself. For 6 years, every bill in that condo had moved in one direction, from my account outward, steady as rent, light, heat, food, and repair. Owen covered his phone, occasional takeout, and the kind of random grocery run that let him feel involved without ever becoming necessary to our survival. I had called it balance because I earned more, but the spreadsheet on my screen turned balance into a cleaner word, subsidizing his entire adult life. I worked line by line through mortgage, assessments, insurance, utilities, groceries, repairs, streaming services, restaurant tabs, weekend bookings, and every convenience he had mistaken for air. When the totals settled, his true half came to $3,665 a month, leaving just enough for pride and not much else after taxes each month. I printed the page, clipped the supporting statements behind it, and left the stack beside his coffee before the first train noise reached our block. He came into the kitchen loose and ordinary, then stopped at the counter, reading long enough for the confidence to drain from his face in silence there. "What is this?" sat in the room for a beat, and I let the paper answer before giving him, "Your half." That morning alone, the color in him shifted almost immediately, and when he reached the bottom line, all he had left was, "I can't afford this at all anymore." I leaned against the counter and watched his eyes return to the number like it might change if he looked scared enough for me today. Instead, I gave him the only thing that still belonged to us, the plain truth that I had been covering everything for 6 full years. Fare had sounded elegant over dinner, but beside coffee and paper, it finally looked like what it was: a bill sent home. 3 days later, I came home just after 6 and knew before I reached the living room that something had shifted inside my home. A camel coat hung on my chair, a white mug rested on my table, and a woman I had never invited in was sitting comfortably beside my husband. Sienna Pike crossed one leg over the other like she had been expected, while Owen sat near her with that calm face he used whenever borrowed confidence arrived first. He looked at me and offered, "Sienna's here to help us talk," as if my marriage had become a panel and my condo had become neutral ground overnight. I set my bag down, looked at the mug in her hand, and gave the only correction the room deserved. "Our place, not a meeting." Sienna smiled without warmth and told me real marriages did not survive spreadsheets. Then let the word wives land carefully, like I was failing some older test she believed she understood. I let her finish because interruption would have given her authority, and she had already taken enough by walking through my door unasked. Then I looked at the woman holding my coffee and asked how much support she accepted after leaving a husband she had called financially disappointing. The silence hit Owen first, because he turned toward her too quickly. And that told me more than anything either of them had planned to say. He tried to pull the room back with, "This isn't about her. It's about us." But the sentence collapsed under the evidence already sitting there. I looked at the coat, the mug, the crossed legs, and told him it was exactly about this. Two people asking me to keep paying for a life neither wanted to fund. Sienna's face tightened at that, and when she reached for, "You're being emotional," all I gave her was the only word that fit. Precise. Which shut the room down harder than shouting would have. Owen's voice sharpened then, accusing me of tearing apart a family over money. But by that point, the accusation sounded smaller than the bills ever had. I looked at him and understood that fear was missing, which meant confidence had been replaced by some private plan he had not shown me yet. Sienna stood, smoothed her coat, and left behind one last warning about men not staying where they felt controlled. And I let the door close on both the advice and the woman delivering it. 2 weeks after Sienna walked through my front door, the first missed payment stopped, looking like stubbornness, and started looking like intention. An invoice tied to one of Owen's agreed household obligations came due. And when I checked the account, his half was not late or partial. It was simply absent, cleanly ignored, as if the number had never belonged to him in the first place. I asked about it that night, and he barely lifted his eyes before giving me, "Some things are your lane. Page," with his phone still in his hand. The sentence landed harder than the missing money, because it stripped the language of fairness down to what it had always been underneath. He did not want equal responsibility, only equal access to the life I maintained, while he chose which parts of adulthood counted for him. I paid the balance the next morning because I was not going to let unpaid obligations become damage inside my own life. Then I saved the invoice, the due date, the account screen, and the exact words he had used, because by then omission looked deliberate. That night he went to shower, left his iPad glowing on the bathroom counter, and what caught my eye first was not a message thread. It was a banking app I had never seen before, sitting open to a balance that made the room feel suddenly smaller. I tapped once and found 8 months of transfers, mostly $500, sometimes $800, occasionally $1,000, all small enough to hide inside ordinary spending. The total sat there in plain numbers. More than $22,000 quietly moved out of sight while he stood in our kitchen acting cornered by a bill. After that, the rest came quickly, like a structure giving way once the first bolt finally slipped loose beneath weight. A payment app showed transfers to Rebecca Sloan. Notes marked dinner, hotel, split, and one small heart that made every recent work trip line up. I took screenshots, sent them to my phone, locked the screen, and set the iPad back exactly where it had been before the water stopped. At 1 a.m, with Owen asleep, I sent every screenshot to my brother Grant and turned my phone face down on the counter. His reply came after 2, just 7 words. "You need to see this in person," and the weight of them kept me awake until sunrise. By 8, I was across from him in a quiet coffee shop, watching his laptop glow between us like a second version of my marriage. Grant worked forensic accounting, so he did not offer comfort first. He opened files, matched dates, and turned suspicion into something harder and cleaner. Rebecca Sloan was not random, not a stray name in an app, but a venue partnerships manager whose travel schedule overlapped every conference Owen mentioned. Dinner charges, hotel splits, and weekend bookings lined up beside industry events, with the kind of neatness that only looks accidental from far away. I did not cry in that coffee shop, because the receipts on his screen had already done the emotional work and left only structure. When Grant asked, "What do you want to do?" I looked at the dates again and knew confrontation would only warn him. What I wanted was math, sequence, leverage, and enough verified truth to keep Owen from rewriting himself into the injured one later. That afternoon, I met Dana Keller, a family lawyer in Cook County whose office felt spare in the way competent places usually do. I gave her the account history, the payment trail, Rebecca's name. and 6 years of imbalance. And she reduced it to a clean plan. Her first instruction was almost disappointing in its simplicity. Act normal. Gather everything. And do not give him a reason to move first. So I went home and became the version of me Owen trusted most. Agreeable at dinner. Steady in bed. Quiet enough to keep him careless. Every night after he slept, I copied statements, backed up messages, saved travel records, and built a case file one ordinary gesture at a time. By the end of that week, I was no longer holding a suspicion together with instinct. I was holding a timeline no lie could survive. On Wednesday, Owen mentioned another conference out of town, and I gave him an easy smile because Dana had already taught me that timing matters more than anger. He watched my face for a second, waiting for suspicion, but I only asked what time his flight left and whether he wanted the blue garment bag. By Friday afternoon, when his car slipped out of the garage, the silence he left behind felt less like loss and more like a door opening. I started with the things that could not be replaced. My work laptop, tax folders, medical records, condo documents, bank files, and every password stored on paper. Then I packed clothes, toiletries, the framed photo of my father, and the small box holding clinic paperwork from a future Owen never deserved access to. Everything went into a short-term apartment Dana had helped me secure. Close enough to work, quiet enough to think, anonymous enough to keep him outside it. I did not strip the condo bare or take anything that blurred ownership, because leaving clean mattered as much as leaving quickly once the file moved. Before sunset, Dana filed the petition, and by the time the city lights came on, my life existed in 2 places instead of 1. He called Sunday evening, voice tight from the first word, asking where I was, why the closet looked wrong, and why half the drawers were empty. I leaned against the apartment counter and gave him nothing, except, "How was your conference?" Because by then the gentlest sentence could cut deepest. The pause on his end told the truth first. So I followed it with River North bookings, payment app transfers, and Rebecca Sloan. I gave him dates, amounts, hotel splits, and the hidden account total, then left the numbers where they were, out in the open. What finally broke his voice was not the affair itself, but hearing it arranged in order. Because order leaves no room for improvising innocence once facts answer cleanly. He tried. "It's not what you think." And I let that fail between us before telling him he had used my stability to finance his private way out. Then I ended the call without raising my voice. Because by then, leaving had already said everything I needed, and the rest belonged to court from there forward. 5 days after I left, a courier brought Owen's response, and the envelope alone felt dishonest before I opened it and found him asking the court to rewrite everything. He wanted support, a share of the condo, reimbursement from accounts he had barely helped build, and language casting me as controlling, unstable, and financially abusive. I read every page at my temporary kitchen table, then read it again more slowly, because once lies enter legal paper, they stop sounding impulsive. What stunned me was not the ambition of it, but the precision, how neatly he had arranged omission into narrative and dependence into injury. The man who hid $22,000, funded weekends with Rebecca Sloan, and missed agreed household obligations was now presenting himself as the spouse abandoned without warning or cause. I called Dana Keller, and her voice stayed flat in the best way when she told me, "Paper only matters when proof can survive it." By Thursday afternoon, she had assembled a response that did not argue with his story so much as press real numbers directly against it. 6 years of statements, the spreadsheet, the missed payment, the hidden account, the transfers, the travel pattern, and condo records closed every soft gap. She also framed the spending around Rebecca Sloan for what it was. Marital money moving outside the marriage while he insisted fairness was impossible. When Owen's lawyer received the package, The energy changed almost immediately, not because anyone had found conscience, but because the fiction had become expensive to maintain. Rebecca Sloan disappeared from his calls first, blocking him once the affair moved from private convenience into documents, dates, and the possibility of sworn declarations. Sienna Pike vanished next, because women who enjoy influence rarely stay when consequences begin asking for names, timelines, and their exact role in escalation. The only person who called me directly was Linda Vale, and the first thing missing from her voice was certainty, which mattered more than apology. She did not defend Owen or question the filing. She only admitted she had raised a son who expected care without contribution and confidence without cost. After that, the legal noise around me began thinning, because once his version met records, screenshots, and a bank trail, it stopped being a case and became a retreat. 2 weeks later, Owen came by after dark, and the only thing different about him was that nothing in his face was asking to be believed anymore. He stood inside my apartment with his hands empty, his voice low, and gave me the first honest version of himself I had heard. The account was real. Rebecca Sloan was real. Sienna Pike got in his head, and somewhere along the way he turned my steadiness into background service. I listened without helping him shape it into something cleaner, because the missing money, the filings, and the silence from everyone else had already done that work. When he finally reached, "I know what I did," the words landed with less force than the records had, but they were true. I let the truth stay plain between us, and gave him only this. Hearing it now did not undo any of it. He nodded like that was the only answer he had left room for, then told me he was moving back in with Linda Vale. He had already instructed his lawyer to stop pushing theories the documents could not carry, and he would sign terms instead of narratives. What mattered to me by then was not punishment or apology, only that the noise had ended and the facts had stopped getting dragged backward. The divorce closed without trial. The condo stayed with me, and the hidden savings he fought so hard to protect turned out smaller than the life he lost. On Friday nights now, I open the windows, make something simple, and let the apartment stay quiet without needing to call that loneliness anymore. Owen once told me his money was his, and in the end, that sentence gave me something better than victory. It gave me my own peace back. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If any part of it felt familiar, I hope you remember that peace can return quietly, after everything else finally stops hurting. If you are finding your way back to yourself, stay close.